Good morning, mates. It's your old pal Angus, Quill, MacGregor. I'm back for a second Saturday morning live in a row. Everyone was very pleased with last week. My editor, Joey, is getting ready for, he's going to be portraying a poet named Allen Ginsberg. He's getting ready for that. So he asked me to fill in here again today. Now, I'm reading something called The Hunting of the Snark by Carroll. I read 3 of his shorter poems last week. It was great fun. Got some missives, some messages indicating, wow, never thought of mashing up Carroll with an old Scottish pirate from the 1700s. I got my sword here. I got my pistol as well. As you know, your world has managed to get itself into war. Here we are 300 years later from when I lived and at war, still again. So we pray for everyone involved in this war right now, who's going to get involved as it unfolds. But I want to get right to the poem today because it's fairly long, but it's quite good. It's a story in a lot of movements here. I'm going to put my sword away here, and I'm going to get right to it. I suppose I'm supposed to do the little bit of branding, so I'll go ahead and do that there, and then we'll get right back to it and read this lovely poem. It's quite terrific. Well, how's that for short and to the point? Excellent. So, The Hunting of the Snark by Carroll, read by me, 18th century poet and pirate Angus Quill MacGregor. Here we go. Hunting the Snark, Lewis the Carroll. First, fit the first, the landing. Just the place for a snark, the bellman cried as he landed his crew with care, supporting each man on the top of the tide by a finger entwined in his hair. Just the place for a snark, I've said it twice, that alone should encourage the crew. Just the place for a snark, I've said it thrice, what I tell you 3 times is true. The crew was complete and included the boots, a maker of bonnets and hoods, a barrister brought to arrange their disputes, and a broker to value their goods. A billmaker whose skill was immense might perhaps have won more than his share, but a banker engaged at enormous expense had the whole of their cash in his care. There was also a beaver that paced on the deck I would make, sitting lace in the bow, and had often, the bellman said, saved them from a wreck, though none of the sailors knew how. There was one who was famed for the number of things he forgot when he entered his ship. His umbrella, his watch, all his jewels and rings, and the clothes he had brought for the trip. He had 42 boxes all carefully packed with his name painted clearly on each, but since he omitted to mention that fact, they were all left behind on the beach. The loss of his clothes hardly mattered because he had 7 coats on when he came, with 3 pairs of boots, but the worst of it was he had wholly forgotten his name. He would answer to hi or to any loud cry such as fry me or fritter me wig, to what you may call him or what was his name, especially thumb and a jig. While for those who preferred a more forcible word, he had different names from these. His intimate friends called him candle ends, and his enemies toasted cheese. His form is ungainly, his intellect small, so the bellman would offer a remark. But his carriage is perfect, and all after that is the thing that one needs with a snark. He would joke with hyenas, returning their stare with an impudent wag of his head, and he once went a walk pour with a bear, just to keep up spirits, he said. He came as a baker, but owned one too late, and it drove the poor bellman half mad. He could only bake bride cake, for which a mistake, no materials were to be had. The last of the crew needs a special remark, though he looked an incredible dunce. And he had just one idea, but that one being Snark, the good bellman engaged him at once. He came as a butcher, but gravely declared when the ship had been sailing a week, he could only kill beavers. The bellman looked scared and was almost too frightened to speak. But at length he explained in a tremulous tone there was only one beaver on board, and that was a tame one he had of his own, whose death would be deeply deplored. The beaver, who happened to hear the remark, protested with tears in its eyes that not even the rapture of hunting the Snark could alone for that dismal surprise. And strongly advised that the butcher should be conveyed in a separate ship, but the bellman declared that would never agree with the plans he had made for this trip. Navigation was always a difficult art, though, with only one ship and one bell, and he feared he must really decline for his part undertaking another as well. The Beaver's best course was no doubt to procure a second-hand dagger-proof coach, so the baker advised it and next to ensure its life in some office of note. This the banker suggested and offered for hire on moderate terms and for sale, to equal excellent policies, one against fire and one against damage from hell. Yet still, even after that sorrowful day, whenever the butcher was by, the Beaver kept looking the opposite way and appeared unaccountably shy. Fit the second the bellman's speech. The bellman himself they all praised to the skies, such a carnage, such ease, and such grace, such solemnity too, one could see he was wise the moment one looked in his face. He had bought a large map representing the sea without the least vestige of land, and the crew were much pleased when they found it to be a map they could all understand. Which the good Mercators, North Poles and Equators, tropics, zones, and meridian lines, so the bellman would cry and the crew would reply they are merely conventional signs. Other maps are such shapes with their islands and capes, but we've got our brave captain to thank. So the crew would protest that he's bought us the best, a perfect, an absolute blank. This was charming, no doubt, but they shortly found out that the captain they trusted so well had only one notion for crossing the ocean, and that was to dingle his bell. He was thoughtful and grave, but the orders he gave were enough to bewilder the crew. When he cried, steer to starboard, but keep her head larboard, what on earth was a helmsman to do? Then the bowsprit got mixed with the rudder sometimes, a thing, as the bellman remarked, that frequently happens in tropical climes when a vessel is, so to speak, snarked. But the principal failing occurred in the sailing, and the bellman, perplexed and distressed, said he had hoped at least when the winds blew due east that the ship would not travel due west. But the danger was past. They had landed at last with their boxes, portmanteaus, and bags. Yet at first sight the crew were not pleased with the view, which consisted of chasms and crags. The bellman perceived that their spirits were low and repeated in musical tone some jokes he had kept for a season of woe, but the crew would do nothing but groan. He served out some grog with a liberal hand and bade them all sit on the beach, and they could not but own that their captain looked grand as he stood and delivered his speech. Friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears. They were all of them fond of quotations. So they drank to his health, and they gave him 3 cheers while he served out additional rations. We have sailed many months, we have sailed many weeks, 4 weeks to the month you may mark, but never as yet, tell your captain who speaks, have we caught the least glimpse of the Snark. We've sailed many weeks, we've sailed many days, 7 days to the week I allow, but a Snark on the which we might lovingly gaze, we have never beheld. Until now. Come listen me, men, while I tell you again the 5 unmistakable marks by which you may know wheresoever you go the warranted genuine Snarks. Let us take them in order. The first is the taste, which is meager and hollow but crisp, like a coat that is rather too tight in the waist, with a flavour of will-o'-the-wisp. His habit of getting up late, you'll agree that it carries too far when I say that it frequently breakfasts at 5 o'clock tea and dines on the following day. The third is its slowness in taking a jest, should you happen to venture on one. It will sigh like a thing that is deeply distressed, and it always looks grave at a pun. The fourth is the fondness for bathing machines, which it constantly carries about, and believes that they add to the beauty of scenes, a sentiment open to doubt. The fifth is ambition. It next will be right to describe each particular patch, distinguishing those that have feathers and biting those that have whiskers and scratch. For although common snarks do no manner of harm, yet I feel it my duty to say, some are boojums. The bellman broke off in alarm. For the baker, it fainted away. Fit the third, the baker's tale. Let's have a little sip here of grog. Grog being simply some sugar, some lime juice, and some rum. That's grog. They roused him with muffins. They roused him with ice. They roused him with mustard and crest. They roused him with jam and judicious advice. They set him conundrums to guess. When at last he sat up and was able to speak, he sad story he offered to tell, and the bellman cried, "Silence, not even a shriek!" and excitedly tingled his bell. There was silence supreme, not a shriek, not a scream, scarcely even a howl or a groan, as the man they called Ho told his story with woe in an antediluvian tone. There was silence supreme, not a shriek, not a scream, scarcely even a howl or groan, as the man they called Ho told his story with woe in an antediluvian tone. "My father and mother were honest, though poor." "Skip all that," cried the bellman in haste. "If it once becomes dark, there's no chance of a Snark. We have hardly a minute to waste." "I skip 40 years," said the baker in tears, "and proceed without further remark to the day when you took me aboard of your ship to help you in hunting the Snark. A dear uncle of mine, after whom I was named, remarked when I bade him farewell, 'Oh, skip your dear uncle,' the bellman exclaimed, as he angrily tingled his bell. He remarks to me then," said that my list of men, "if your Snark be a Snark, that is right. Fetch it home by all means, you may serve it with greens, and it's handy for striking a light. You may seek it with thimbles and seek it with care, you hunt it with forks and with hope. You may threaten its life with a railway share, you may charm it with smiles and soap." "That's exactly the method," the bellman bold in a hasty parenthesis cried. "That's exactly the way I've always been told that the capture of Snark should be tried. But oh, Beamish nephew, beware of the day if your Snark be a boojum, for then you will softly and suddenly vanish away and never be met with again. It is this that oppresses me so, when I think of my uncle's last words, and my heart is like nothing so much as a bow brimming over with quivering clouds. It is this, we have had this before," the bellman indignantly said, and the baker retried, "Let me say it once more, it is this that I dread. I engage with the Snark every night, every dark, in a dreamy, delirious fight. I serve it with greens in those shadowy scenes, and I use it for striking a light. But if ever I met with a boojum that day, in a moment of this, I am sure, I shall softly and suddenly vanish away in the notion I cannot endure. Fit the fourth, the hunting." The bellman looked uffish and wrinkled his brow. "It is only you'd spoken before. It's excessively awkward to mention it now with the Snark, so to speak, at the door. We should all of us grieve, as you well may receive, if you never were met with again. But surely, my man, when the voyage began, you might have suggested it then. It's excessively awkward to mention it now, as I think I've already remarked." And the man they called High replied with a sigh, "I informed you the day we embarked. You may charge me with murder or want of sense, we are all of us weak at times, but the slightest approach to the fullest pretense was never amongst me crimes. I said it in Hebrew, I said it in Dutch, I said it in German and Greek, but wholly forgotten it vexes me much that English is all what you speak." "'Tis a pitiful tale," said the bellman, whose face had grown longer at every word, "but now that you stated the whole of your case, more debate would be simply absurd. The rest of me speech," he explained to his men, "you shall hear when I've leisure to speak it. But the Snark is at hand, let me tell ye again, till your glorious duty to seek it. To seek it with thimbles, to seek it with care, to pursue it with forks and with hope, to threaten its life with a railway share, to charm it with smiles and soap. For the Snark's a peculiar creature that won't be caught in a commonplace way. Do all that you know and try all that you don't, not a chance must be wasted today. For England expects, I forbear to proceed, 'tis a maximum tremblous but trite, and you're best to be unpacking the things that you need to rig yourselves out for a fight. Grab your guns and muskets." The boots and the broker were sharpening the spade, each working the grindstone in turn, but the beaver went on making a lace and displayed no interest of concern. Then the banker endorsed a blank check which he crossed and changed his loose silver for notes. The baker with care combed his whiskers and hair and shook the dust out of his coats. Though the barrister tried to appeal to its pride, it vainly proceeded to cite a number of cases in which it makes laces had proven infringement of right. The maker of bonnets ferociously planned a novel arrangement of bows, while the billiard maker with quill in hand was chalking the tip of his nose. But the butcher turned nervous and dressed himself fine with yellow kid gloves and a ruff. Said he felt it exactly like going to dine, while the bellman declared was all stuff. Introduce me now, there's a good fellow, he said, if we happen to meet it together. And the bellman, sagaciously nodding his head, said, that must depend on the weather. The beaver went simply galumphing about it, seeing the butcher so shy, and even the baker so stupid and stout, made an effort to wink with one eye. Aye. Be a man, said the bellman in wrath as he heard the bushman beginning to sob. Should we meet the Jub, that desperate bird, we shall need all our strength for the job. She'd been hearing word from the Jabberwock that a road read last week. So here we go, the fifth, the beaver's lesson. They shot it with thimbles, they sought it with care, they pursued it with forks and with hope. They threatened its life with a railway share, they charmed it with smiles and soap. Then the butcher contrived an ingenious plan for making a separate sally, and fixed on a spot unfrequented by man, a dismal and desolate valley. But the very same plan to the beaver occurred, and had chosen the very same place, yet neither betrayed by a sign or a word the disgust that appeared in his face. Even though he was thinking of nothing but Snark and the glorious work of their day, and he tried to pretend that he did not remark that the other was going that way. But the valley grew narrower and narrower still, and the evening got darker and colder, till merely from nervousness, not from goodwill, they marched along shoulder to shoulder. Then a scream, shrill and high, rendered the shuddering sky, and they knew that some danger was near. The beaver turned pale to the tip of its tail, and even the butcher felt queer. He thought of his childhood left far, far behind, that blissful and innocent state. The sound so exactly recalled to his mind a pencil that squeaks on a slate. Actually, terrible sound, right? "'Tis the voice of the Jub," he suddenly cried. "This man they used to call Dunce. As the bellman would tell ye, he added with pride, I have uttered that sentiment once. 'Tis the note of the Jub, keep count, I entreat. You will find I have told it you twice. 'Tis the song of the Jub, the proof is complete, if I've only stated it thrice." The beaver had counted with scrupulous care, attending to every word, but it fairly lost heart, and now grave in despair when the third repetition occurred. It felt that, in spite of all possible pains, it had somehow contrived to lose count, and the only thing now was to rack its poor brains by reckoning up the amount. "I've added to one, if that could be done," it said with one's fingers and thumbs, recollecting with tears how in earlier years it had no pains to work with its sums. "The thing can be done," said the butcher. I think must be done, I am sure. The thing must be done, bring me paper and ink, the best time is to procure." The beaver brought paper, portfolio, pens, and inkling in unfailing supplies, while strange creepy creatures came out of their dens and washed them with wondering eyes. So engrossed was the butcher he needed them not, as he wrote with a pen in each hand, and explained all the while in a popular style, which the beaver could well understand. "Taking thee as a subject to reason about, a convenient number to state, we add 7 and 10, and then multiply out by 1,000 diminished by 8. The result we proceed to divide, as you see, by 992, then subtract 17, and the answer must be exactly and perfectly true. The method applied I would gladly explain, which I have no clear in my head. If I had but the time and you had but the brain, but much remains to be said. In one moment I've seen what has hitherto been enveloped in absolute mystery, and without extra charge I will give you a lesson in natural history." In his genial way, he proceeded to say, forgetting all laws of propriety, and that given instruction without introduction would have caused quite a thrill in society. "As the temper of the Jub's a desperate bird, since it lives in perpetual passion, its taste in costumes entirely absurd. It is ages ahead of the fashion. But it knows any friend it has not met once, it never will look at a bridge, and in charity meetings it stands at the door and collects, though it does not describe. Its flavour when cooked is more exquisite far than mutton or oysters or eggs. Some thinks it keeps best in an ivory jar, and others in mahogany kegs. You boil it in sawdust, you sell it in glue, you condense it with locusts and tape, still keeping one principal object in view, to preserve its symmetrical shape." The butcher would gladly have talked till next day, but he felt that the lesson must end, and he wept with delight in attempting to say he considered this beaver a friend. While the beaver confessed with affectionate looks, more eloquent even than tears, it had learned in 10 minutes far more than all books would have taught it in 70 years. They returned hand in hand, and the bellman and man for a moment with noble emotion said this amply repays all the wearisome days we have spent on the billowy ocean. Such friends as the beaver and butcher became have seldom, if ever, been known. In winter or summer 'twas always the same. You could never meet either alone. And when quarrels arose, as one frequently finds, quarrels will, despite every endeavour, the song of the Jub recurred to their minds and cemented their friendship forever. Show fit the six were moving right along here, the barristers dream. Ooh. They shot it with thimbles, they sought it with care, they pursued it with forks and with hope. They threatened its life with a railway share, they charmed it with smiles and hope. But the barrister, weary of proving in vain that the beaver's lace-making was wrong, fell asleep and in dreams saw the creature quite plain that his fancy had dwelt on too long. He dreamed that he stood in the shadowy court, with the Snark with a glass in its eye, dressed in a gown, bands and wigs, was defending a pig on the charge of deserting its sty. The witnesses proved without error or flaw that the sty was deserted when found, and the judge kept explaining the state of the law in a soft undercurrent of sound. The witness proved without error or flaw that the sty was deserted when found, and the judge kept explaining the state of the law in a soft undercurrent of sound. The indictment had never been clearly expressed, and it seemed that the Snark had begun and spoken 3 hours before anyone guessed what the pig was supposed to have done. The jury had each formed a different view long before the indictment was read, and they all spoke at once so that none of them knew one word that the others had said. You must know, said the judge, but the Snark exclaimed, fudge! That statute is obsolete quite. Let me tell you, me friends, the whole question depends on an ancient manorial right. In the matter of treason, the pig would appear to have aided but scarcely abetted. With the charge of insolvency fails, it is clear, if you grant the pleas never indebted. The fact of desertion I will not dispute, but guilt as at last I trust removed, so far as related to the cost of this suit, by the alibi which has been proved. My poor client's fate now depends on your votes. Here the speaker sat down in his place and directed the judge to refer to his notes and briefly sum up the case. But the judge said he never summed up before, so the Snark undertook it instead, and summed it so well that it came to far more than the witnesses ever had said. When the verdict was called, the jury declined, as the word was so puzzling to spell, but they ventured to hope that the Snark wouldn't mind undertaking that duty as well. So the Snark found the verdict, although it was owned, it was spent with the toils of the day. When it said the word guilty, the jury all groaned, as some of them fainted away. Then the Snark pronounced sentence, the judge being quite too nervous to utter a word. When it rose to its feet, there was a silence like night, and the fall of a pin might be heard. Transportation for life was the sentence it gave, and then to be fined £40. The jury all cheered, though the judge said he feared that the phrase was not lethally sound. But their wild exultation was suddenly checked when the jailer informed them with tears such a sentence would not have the slightest effect, as the pig had been dead for some years. The judge left the court looking deeply disgusted by the Snark, though a little aghast, and the lawyer to whom the defence was entrusted went on bellowing to the last. Then the barrister dreamed, while the bellowing seemed to grow every moment more clear, till he woke to the knell of a furious bell, which the bellman rang close to his ear. Fit the seventh, the banker's fate. They showed it with thimbles, they sought it with care, they pursued it with forks and with hope. They threatened its life with a railway share, they charmed it with smiles and shope. And the banker, inspired with a courage so new, was matter for general remark, rushed madly ahead and was lost to the view in his zeal to recover the Snark. But while he was seeking with thimbles and clare, a bandersnatch swiftly drew nigh and grabbed at the banker, who shrieked in despair, for he knew it was useless to fly. He offered large discount, he offered the check drawn to bearer for £7.10, but the bandersnatch merely extended its head and grabbed at the banker again. Without rest or pause, with those frumious jaws, when savagely snapping around, he skipped and he hopped and he floundered and flopped till fate and he fell to the ground. The bandersnatch fled as the others appeared, led on by that fear-stricken yell, and the bellman remarked, it is just as I feared, and solemnly toiled his bell. He was black in the face, and they could hardly trace the likeness to what he had been, while so great was his fright that his waistcoat turned white, a wondrous thing to be seen. To the horror of us all who were present that day, he uprose in full evening dress, and senseless grimaces endeavoured to say where his tongue could no longer express. Down he sank in a chair, and his hands through his hair, and chanted in mimsiest tones. Words who uttered insanity proved his insanity, while he rattled a couple of tones. Leave him here to his fate. It's getting so late, the bellman exclaimed in affright. We have lost half the day, another further delay, and we shan't catch a Snark before night. Here we go, the final, fifth, the eighth, the vanishing. They sought it with thimbles, they sought it with care, they pursued it with forks and with hope. They threatened its life with a railway share, they charmed it with smiles and shopes. They shuddered to think that the chase might fail, and the beaver, excited at last, went bounding along on the tip of its tail, for the daylight was nearly past. There's a thingamabob shouting, the bellman said. He's shouting like mad, only hark. He is waving his hands, he's waving his head, he has certainly found us a Snark. There's a thingamabob shouting, the bellman said. The butcher, he then exclaimed. He was always a desperate wag. They beheld him, their baker, the hero unnamed, on the top of a neighbouring crag. Erect and sublime for one moment in time, and next that wild figure they saw, as if stunned while they waited and listened in awe. It's a Snark was the sound that first came to their ears and seemed almost too good to be true. There followed a torrent of laughter and cheers, the opposite words, it's a boo! Then silence, some fancied they heard in the air, a weary and wandering sigh, then sounded like jum, but the others declare it was only a breeze that went by. They hunted till darkness came on, but they found not a button, a feather, or mark, by which they could tell that they stood on the ground where the baker had met with the Snark. In the midst of the word he was trying to say, in the midst of his laughter and glee, he had softly and suddenly vanished away, for the Snark was a boojum. You see, you might have caught a little bit of foreshadowing there. Sure, I kept you almost a half an hour this morning. Sure, I'm not going to do any toasts or promote anything. Or everyone stay safe. Pray for the world. I was in war more often than not for almost 30 years. Took a little break, and then as an old man, got involved a little at the beginning of the American Revolution. War is wearying. War is death and evil and misery, and not too much glory at all. So don't fall for that old bit. So as I always tell you, ask for more democracy in your democracy, because I'm telling you what I see. You're going to need it. Take care, and I'll see you all soon. Bye.